This year, a La Niña has developed, but it'll be fading quickly. So what does that mean for you, where you live, for winter ahead? And once we see La Niña get out of the picture, what does that mean for the rest of the winter? From storm tracks to big temperature swings, I've got you covered for every part of the country this winter season. And I mean, get ready, because this winter outlook may surprise you. So in this video, you're going to learn what drives the forecast. You'll learn about El Niño, La Niña, the Arctic Oscillation, and other factors that are involved in this winter forecast. Hey, I'm meteorologist Anthony Slaughter. So we're headed into winter, and a lot of folks want to know what the forecast is going to be. Now, I got to be honest with you, forecasting this far out, there is a lot that's going to change. But there's one thing that's giving us clues as to what we can expect, and that is a La Niña that is developing in the eastern Pacific. But what do those terms actually mean? Well, El Niño means Christ child, referring to Jesus, and La Niña means little girl. But why those terms? Well, Peruvian fishermen discovered very warm waters near the equatorial region in 1892. And it was around Christmas time, so they just decided to name the phenomenon El Niño. And a La Niña means cooler sea surface temperatures. Even though we're going to be in a La Niña to start the winter, we could end up in a neutral or El Niño phase by the time it's all said and done. And the data is there to prove that we are coming out of this La Niña quickly. I mean, as you look at the sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific, once we get into the heart of winter, La Niña is out of here. Now, in a typical La Niña year, we would have a warm, dry southern half of the United States, with most of the cold and snow staying bottled up across the northern tier states. But this is no typical La Niña. In fact, it barely qualifies as a La Niña, with just a few degrees Celsius away from being a neutral phase. So I think we're closer to being headed into that neutral phase than we think. And as you look at this graph, notice the year 2010, 2011, that was a stronger La Niña than the one we have now. Now, because our pattern is going to completely shift as we go through the middle of the winter, I do think it's going to start off pretty quiet in December, probably very inactive, with just a little bit happening. That would mean probably not a white Christmas for a lot of locations. But then it's going to jump start right into January and February, the jet stream, sending waves of atmospheric rivers into California, leading to flooding and catastrophic mudslides. Of course, all of that rain's got to go somewhere, and that's going to move into the plains, where I think it's going to be the battleground. Yeah, ground zero when it comes to ice storms, mixed precipitation and snow, and plenty of nor'easters to come this winter across the East Coast. The other part of this equation lies in the North Pole, the Arctic Oscillation. Now, the best way to understand the Arctic Oscillation is to think of it as a spinning top. But every now and again, that top will wobble. And when it wobbles, it can displace that Arctic air, sometimes sending sub-zero temperatures as far south as the Gulf states and even into Mexico. Now, long-range climate model data is pointing this winter towards one that was a lot like 2010, 2011. And that one was marked by extreme and historic weather events. There was also a persistent La Niña weather pattern in place, and, well, that caused a record-breaking number of blizzards and an unusual number of other winter storms. In fact, the Groundhog Day blizzard, which was 3 days, caused issues in Chicago with over 20 inches of snow and disruptions to the Super Bowl in Dallas. Among blizzards around Christmas time to nor'easter after nor'easter through January for New England. This snowy winter was marked Snowmageddon by one article. And of course, we can't forget the cold. For some parts of the states, like in Oklahoma, they had record-breaking low temperatures that year. Even in Mexico, where the temperature dropped down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. There were tornadoes on New Year's Eve, and in New England, nor'easter after nor'easter through the month of January, even into February. And this caused some of the highest snow totals on record for parts of New England. Even though we're going to be in a La Niña to start the winter, we could end up in a neutral or El Niño phase by the time it's all said and done. And that would mean a more typical winter, one that we haven't seen recently. All right, now this map is from the Climate Prediction Center, and it shows a seasonal temperature outlook for October, November, and December. And you can see for yourself, much of the country above average and well above average across the desert Southwest, New England, and even Florida. So this gets us into the start of winter, but it doesn't include January and February, which of course are known to be colder winter months. Now, this is a seasonal precipitation outlook through October, November, and December, and it matches what you would expect in a La Nina pattern. Quiet weather for the southern half of the country, and wetter than average for the Pacific Northwest, parts of Alaska, and even down into Florida. But again, this is just to start winter and does not include January and February, and even March, which are sometimes known to be very volatile months when it comes to big snowstorms. All right, so let's go region by region. Starting with the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest. This is where I think the storm track is really going to shift from December to January, from more of a wet pattern in the Pacific Northwest to start the season to more of California getting in on the action by January and February, with mudslides and flooding concerns, of course, always a thing to watch. All right, let's get to the Midwest. This is where I think it's going to be very active this winter, from Arctic outbreaks to severe weather. And I think the extremes are really going to be felt here the most, from Minnesota down into Louisiana and every place in between. That's where you can expect mixed precipitation, sleet, snowstorms, ice storms. Those will be plentiful. I think once we get into January and February, that's really when we're going to start to see the snow add up in these locations and several Arctic outbreaks that could send our temperatures plummeting to near record low temperatures in some instances, especially across the northern tier states into the Great Lakes. And in recent years, we've had some freak snowstorms across the deep south. Yeah, I'm talking places like New Orleans, where they recorded their highest amount of snowfall just last year. And I think once we get into the heart of winter this year, we're going to see those extremes reach the southeast. Yeah, we could have more coastal snowstorms like we had last year. And even in the Great Lakes, I think we're going to be looking at historic amounts of snow piling up in places like Buffalo, maybe even Cleveland, and even into Detroit. And it doesn't stop there. I think a lot of nor'easters are going to cause a lot of travel problems. This winter has been compared to 2010 and 2011, and if you Google that winter, you'll find that we had plenty of nor'easters causing travel disruptions weekend after weekend, and it takes no scientist to see that that was a rough winter. And here's a little bonus nugget if you're watching from the bi-state. The St. Louis area actually had a tornado outbreak New Year's Eve, 2010, as we rang in the new year. Yeah, this is the winter that I've been referring to this entire video. And in fact, one of the strongest tornadoes that rolled through St. Louis that night was an EF3 in Sunset Hills. One person did die in this tornado and 6 others were injured. And you can see it wasn't just one tornado. There were several tornadoes in Missouri and both Illinois that night. So as we look back on this particular winter, remember, it's not always snow that causes problems. Sometimes it's those sneaky severe weather events too. So of course, this forecast goes out several months in advance, and of course, it's subject to change. But one thing is for certain, we've already seen wild extremes this year and in previous years. So I would just not let your guard down as we go through these winter months. Not only when it comes to being prepared for snowy travel, but also being prepared for severe weather at the drop of a dime. Whether it's rain, sleet, or snow, you got to be in the know. And so make sure that you are here all through winter as we get through this together. I'm meteorologist Anthony Slaughter. Have a great day.